coming. Some of the naysayers, being naysayers, are late. So we're not going to wait for them. We'll start. It's just, I'm just going to introduce, I'm just going to say thank you all for coming. But I need to say special thanks to 3 persons because Simon forgot to put their name in the acknowledgement. And this is really, for this book, it's really quite important. Obviously, we great thanks to Simon for writing this book, so that we can get more people to know something about all these difficult people around in Singapore. All we read about them is in the newspapers, but you know, there's so much more about them that we really want you to know. So I'm so glad Simon has done this book. And of course, to thank the 26 people who agreed to be in the book. Some did not agree to be in, some refused to be in, I think ignored Simon completely, and all that. But for a company like us that really doesn't, don't have to say what, we can't afford lawyers generally. So to get this book published, this is the one book where we really need the lawyers to go through it before we publish it. So I'm really very grateful that we approached 3 lawyers to read instead of 1, because if we were to get sued, that's the end of Epigram books. So we asked 3 lawyers who agreed to read the book through and then gave us legal advice on what we needed to do to avoid trouble. And so the 3 lawyers were, I have to acknowledge them because we forgot to put their names in the book. And they did it for free. Jack Lee, I think he's not here. I think they're all not here. We invited them, but they're not here. Maybe we want to do. Swan Vijaya and Peter Lowe. 3 lawyers who read through the manuscript and gave us legal advice for free. So I'm really grateful. Without these 3, I think we may not have gone ahead to publish. So, they're not here for me. Okay, with that, I would like to leave the session to Simon, the author, and he'll take over from here. I'll just slink back to the back. Thank you all. And sorry. Quite a number of people who did not register wanted to come, and I said you could come on one condition: you had to buy more than 1 book. So if you're only going to buy 1, can I ask please share the book or buy more than 1 copy? Thanks.
Thank you everyone for coming here. It's so nice to see so many people here. This book was written in a way that, while reading it, you might find that, you have a friend which you never thought you had. So you find something new about Singapore. And I'm quite excited to say this. Welcome to the Naysayers book club. The book is now live, and it's a book club now. So we'll be starting off with a panel discussion. The first panelist is Constance Singham, the mother of civil society. Our second panelist is Tay Keng Soon, the contrarian architect. And our last panelist is Seelan Pale, the fearless artist. So we'll have a panel discussion for the first 30 minutes, and then after that we'll break off, you can mingle with everybody, and do take a chance to say hi to all of these naysayers. You might never ever get another chance to see all of these people in one room. And after that, we'll have a blind Q&A session. So please drop off your questions in this bowl. Whatever questions you'd like to ask, just drop it there. Any questions? Yeah. Okay, without further ado, we'll start the session. So one of the things I'm quite interested in is when I started this book, the title got its name from the fact that there was a lot of talk about needing more naysayers now. And since then, just a month before this book was published, there was this viral letter by a student from Tembusu College saying, we're asking for naysayers, but then, but then we're also, we're not always giving them space. And then just more recently, there was an NMP, Quick Shawin, who also mentioned this contradiction in asking for naysayers but not giving them space. So I'd like to ask the panelists, what do you make of this recent call for naysayers? Is there a new urgency about it?
I start first?
Yes, please.
For one thing, I don't like the term naysayers. And another thing,
troublemaker might be better.
Another thing, I thought you first started by naming it Naysayers, and then you moved on to Naysayers Book Club, which I thought was brilliant. When you added that book club part of it. I've forgotten the question.
What do you make of the prevalence of this call for people?
Naysayers. I'm not sure that the people who say are from establishment and who are in the governing party are not saying that they want naysayers from my side of the divide. They want people who are in their own establishment elite to be naysayers. But at the same time, I do also hear stories that when you are a naysayer, you do get ignored and denied a space. So I don't know how sincere they are about wanting naysayers. Because we've been around for a very long time. I've been around for 35 years. And why are they asking? We are around.
So when you say my side, you mean civil society activists?
Yeah, civil society.
King Soon?
I don't know what I'm doing here. Actually, I don't know what to say, actually, should I be a yay-sayer? I don't know. I think people are bored. So that's why I want to talk about naysayers, right? They need some entertainment, right? This is, I've stopped reading the Straits Times. It's terribly boring, right? I also switched off the TV. I'm a lot on Facebook. Some of you have been, sparring with me. Yeah, and I don't know why I didn't get into trouble yet. Maybe I'm not naying enough or braying enough. Not sure what to say, actually. I don't know why you're all here anyway.
Seelan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I guess there's a... You're talking about need, right?
Yeah.
There has been a need for a long time, maybe since 1965. And I guess we are just part of a process, there's actually multiple strains of connection between the various generations of activists and artists and even musicians. And if you could actually connect those dots together, you'd find out, you'd see that, we're not really individuals. We're not really a community, but it's all connected in some way. So it's not even about whether there's a need or not a need. It's actually a natural consequence or result. That's all.
So all of you guys have been active in civil society for quite a long time, and you all know other people who have challenged the status quo. When you all were reading the book, did anything surprise you, or did anything stick out about the other people who are in this book club?
I thought your epithets are very apt, particularly on Beng Huat. the liberal's nightmare, right? Mine was, I think, just simply descriptive, right?
What would you like to be called?
I really can't answer that. I don't know. Yeah, and I've been
For
told
somebody who
I've
has-
been told quite often that I'm a troublemaker.
For somebody who has a lot to say on Facebook, you keep saying I don't have anything to say.
It's contextual, you see, right? I don't know about. Maybe you have to get me going, huh?
Yeah, Silan, did anything stuck out for you as a younger member of civil society? One of the newer.
Not that young also lah, but okay, youngish. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that did stick out was Alex Au didn't say he has any books that he likes. He actually said nil, right? So I can't remember if
He was
there's.
naysaying the premise of the book.
Oh, okay, and. Yeah.
That's too much to read. News, opinion editorials, and whole lot. I've been reading and reading. I'm like, God, I think I'm going to get cataract soon. But books are good. They're interesting. I've read some great books, but it takes a lot of time to sit down on a beach. I haven't even had like 2-3 days in a row for the better part of the last 5 to 6 years. So it's been tough. Getting the time.
It's the life of the activist.
Unfortunately, either speaking to your lawyer or looking around for asylum visas.
Yeah. And the other part of the book that was interesting to me was the part by Jennifer Teo, where she spoke about how she's not interested in politics. She's more interested in people and society and community. And I think that is actually a common strain throughout all the people who are featured in the book, really. I don't think any of them have political ambitions in that sense of the word. I haven't come across it. And yet, there is a desire to do something, to respond, to participate, to organize. So what drives that motivation? That's interesting when you think about it. Yeah.
I'd like to ask you. So you've done this artwork, right? Which is a statement. It's a protest art. It's an artistic expression at the same time. What's the response been like since that moment?
From
different parts of society, your friends.
Yeah, mostly have been supportive, I think. A lot of people don't see the sense in what the authorities did. You know, it's some are unable to read the artwork because they don't have the kind of literacy in art and art theory and practice, right? But they do see the problem with if it's just one person performing or walking or standing with a mirror with drawings on it, why should they arrest such a person? So generally that kind of response. Mm-hmm.
So when Silan did this artwork and it was covered in the media, a lot of it was about the action itself. So I made sure to give a kind of detailed description of the aesthetic meaning behind it. So because it's as much an artistic expression as a statement. So when you did that, right? What was the motivation for you? Was it a way of trying to connect with Cha Taibo? Did he contact you after the performance, right? In any chance?
No. He didn't contact me, but I've been told that he has been made aware of what happened. So yeah, I think the purpose is really just expression and responding. And if you read the book, you'll find out the reasons why it was done last year. For example, the primary reason is he was detained for 32 years, and I turned 32 years old last year. So there is that kind of overlap between time and life and experience. And I felt a very strong urge to respond to it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be at peace with myself. Also, people may think that what I did comes from a position of strength, but actually it's not. What I did, it comes from a position of weakness and actually helplessness. There is nothing else you can do. There seems to be no recourse. There seems to be no avenue for justice at all. There also seems to be no way to even ask a question or get a response. That's why it was done. So I also disagree with the title that you gave my section of the book, which is The Fearless Artist. It's first of all, the word fearless might imply bravery, but then, or heightened form of bravery, but then that makes it seem like only I would be fearless. But what I'm trying to communicate is that everyone should feel fearless to express themselves, no matter what their views are. Yeah.
The trouble with interviewing naysayers is that they don't agree with a lot of your questions. I'd like to switch it around to Tay Keng Soon. So, I mean, if you read the book, he's got this. It could actually be subtitled as Entering the Mind of Tay Keng Soon. So he's got these really multifaceted ideas about how you can change Singapore. And it starts out, with the university level, how do you increase interfaculty participation and everything. But what I found interesting was, in this project he's working on, that the government has actually been willing to entertain his ideas and participate. So the government is not always monolithic. So for Keng Soon, how, in your experience, how do you get the government on board?
What was that? Before I go there, let me say something in response to Silan here. The greatest sense of freedom that I felt in my life was to walk in the middle of the high street after the demonstration which we organized against US bombing of Vietnam. And there were hundreds of us outside the US embassy. And I must say that I actually started the umbrella movement. Because in discussing how are we going to bring a placard to the demonstration in a bus, right? It's a big problem, right? So I said, why don't we just use an umbrella? We paint all the slogans on the umbrella, close it, take a bus, go down there, open it, and when the ISD cameraman comes, you can block the view. Yeah, and that was a tremendous sense of freedom, Of course, after that, my practice was collapsed. And I had to emigrate to Malaysia for 10 years to rebuild my career. That was a fantastic feeling, which I think that when you talk about fear, definitely there was fear, but there was also exhilaration. And I think maybe Silan can explain that too, right? When you were arrested, how did you feel, right? There were 4 of us that walked right in the middle of the road. We blocked the traffic, right? That was great fun. Yeah. After that, the ISD called my partner and told him to get me out of the firm. And so my firm design partnership was closed down because I refused to resign. And so they have now become the biggest practice in Singapore called DP Architects. Yeah, okay. So what is your question?
Well, how do you engage stakeholders like the government?
Yeah, okay. I worked with my students in architectural school, and most of them are Singaporeans, of course. I asked them, how much do you spend on bus fares per day? And how much time do you spend? They say 2 hours traveling back and forth, about $100 a month. So I said, why don't you live on campus? They said, we can't, $500 a month, right? And also, there are only 10% of students allowed to live on campus. So I said, why don't we work on a project about using shipping containers so that we can live on campus at $100 a month? Okay, so this was done. Designs were made. Let me see what happened after that. We had a presentation to the provost at that time, Tan Eng Chai, and also the science advisor to Prime Minister's office, Professor Liu Baochun, who is now in the National Research Foundation. Both of them were very excited by the idea. Okay, so somebody, I don't know who, I actually know who, but I don't want to reveal the name, sent a letter to the minister, and then the minister called me up, Ong Yi Kang, and then we had a meeting, and he asked me to explain, so I explained that the idea of having 100% live-in campus is so that our students can be away from their Filipino mates and their doting mothers, so that they can develop some kind of independent spirit. Minister actually agreed, to my surprise. And he said that he will send a note down to the university, implement pilot project. That was 3 years ago.
So there is cause for optimism.
Cautious optimism, okay? Because that was 3 years ago. And then the existing Vice Chancellor, or which they now call President, killed the project. That was an independent initiative on the part of the Vice Chancellor against Minister's instruction. Fantastic. He killed it because not that there are no funds, the funds are in huge amounts, but cannot be used, in his view, for such a project because the funds are only to get academic ranking in the world. Okay? So he killed it. 3 years later, a student of mine volunteered to pay for it.
Student,
a graduate.
big pockets.
No, he's a 10-year graduate. He made a lot of money. And he told me that, what can I do with the money? I said, go and build this thing. Right. So then then that started the whole process, right? And then now it's going to be built. Yeah. Yeah.
Let me ask a question for Constance. So you've seen through the evolution of civil society, right? So when I was talking to you, you were talking about TWC. After that, you started TWC2. You were trying to get rid of the fear that was around in 60s and 70s. And then after that, now you started a few years ago Singapore Advocacy Awards to recognize those people who might not be recognized otherwise. So from your perspective, what is the state of civil society now? Where are we at right now?
Thank you for asking me the question. I had prepared the answer. No, I mean, we are all excited about what's happening across the causeway. And we want to examine ourselves at why are we different from them, Why are they able to do things that we were hoping could happen here, but I know it can't happen here. And I asked myself, why can't it happen here? And I want to use an analogy. It might be a naive one, but I'm going to say it anyway. I started thinking of Cambodia and Pol Pot and how he destroyed a whole civilization because he wanted to reinvent Cambodia as an agrarian society. And what he did was he got rid of, destroyed, killed, starved all the professionals, all the middle class, and the whole of the intellectual life of Cambodia. And I was thinking of what happened here. First thing what happened was we had a rupture from Malaysia, for which both of us are still grieving, about which our heritage from that period of our history. And that was the first rupture. The second one was, of course, as a result of that, they got Tengku Abdul Rahman and we got Lee Kuan Yew. And that makes a huge difference because of the way we moved. We wanted to be a successful, efficient, economically successful city, republic. Efficiency was there, and pragmatism and efficiency ruled their philosophy. And we had, and I'm not just focusing on Lee Kuan Yew, there was Rajaratnam, who was Minister for Culture, Goh Keng Swee, who was Minister for Education. And the first thing he did was to bring in system analysts into the education system. Then there was Devan Nair, who overseed the labor movement. And then Toh Chin Chai, who became Vice Chancellor of the university. Between the four of them, they destroyed our cultural and intellectual life. Systematically, they got rid of civil society. And it was not till 1980s that civil society started surfacing. Now, when you do that, and of course we were all the frogs in the water, we were excited because they were a social. I was excited. I was young. I was able to vote, so I was an adult. And I was excited by this new sense of nationalism and this new excitement about the socialist democratic government that we have in Singapore. I marched with them. I went and did Gotong Royong with them, all sorts of things. And we didn't realize that slowly, we were becoming the frog in the hot water. And now we don't know how to get out. And we are struggling to get out. So that was my first point about understanding our history. Second point is, how do we get out? I have a question, and I told Vincent that I would like to, Simon, yes. I'd like to talk about, look at ourselves. We're always blaming the other side. The laws, the restrictions, the oppression. I want us to look at ourselves and see what it is that we can do. We may not be able to overthrow our government, but we can change them, you know. And that is the role of civil society in Singapore. We can't get out of our history. I see there is this feeling in the in the room. I don't know. And one of the things that I worry about is that we don't even know how to get together as a community of civil society activists.
But perhaps it's also the fact that in Malaysia there was a much bigger sense of crisis, and the situation there seemed to be a lot more dire. That's why there was a much more spontaneous reaction. So perhaps Singapore, things aren't as bad.
No, it's actually quite bad. Yeah, and your analogy about the boiling frog is absolutely right. We are in a situation of slow motion self-destruct, and that's why it's hard to pinpoint what needs to be done and so on and so forth, right? But I want to take up your point about history, and it has been vexing me a lot, thinking about history. And I think that you cannot talk about Singapore history without talking about world history. And that's our problem, because the whole idea of Singapore itself is actually an Anglo-American construct. Okay? We are the instrument of the Anglo-American hegemony over the rest of Southeast Asia and the world. And it's quite simple to understand once you see it from that point of view. The history goes back to Chia Tai Po and all those guys, right? What was actually happening was, this is something which all must be aware of. All the political activists of that period were all leftists. including Lee Kuan Yew,
Yeah.
right? But they were leftists from the hard left to I would call the soft left, okay? The liberal left. The hard left basically, well, first of all of them knew that the game was about how do you deal with the Anglo-American hegemony, the oppression of the Anglo-American system, which sought to control the economy of the world, right, against the evil empire of the Soviets and the Chinese. Okay, the hard left decided that in the politics of Singapore, they advocated playing hardball with the West. The Lee Kuan Yew faction decided to play softball with the West. So that's a very simple way of understanding the game, right? Because everybody knew that in '53 Mossadegh was overthrown because he wanted to nationalize the oil. All of them knew. '61, and I asked Lim Chin Joo this question. They all knew that Patrice Lumumba was assassinated by the CIA in Congo. And there were demonstrations in Singapore to support the freedom movement in Congo, okay? So all of that became anathema to the soft left because the soft left had to make a deal with the Anglo-American hegemony, okay? And in order to do so, they had to play hardball with local people. That explains Chia Tai Po's arrest, Po Su Kai, the whole lot, right? Lim Sin Chong, and then the control of the press, the control of all the media, control of everybody. The PAP government, in its wisdom, in relation to the Anglo-American overarching power system, had to play hardball with the rest of us. It's as simple as that. And here we are today, right? Comfortable, right? And quite happy with the situation, right? Grumbling here and there, but that's about it.
Okay, that's a nice segue. So I'm told we are out of time. So perhaps just for the last bit, perhaps each of you can say in 2 sentences or so, what is your wish for Singapore now and into the future? What do you think needs to be done, or what do you all see lacking? What is your wish for Singapore?
Singaporeans to wake up. Less than 1 sentence, right?
I think Singaporeans, one of our biggest problem is the Singaporeans who are just observers of the scene. Think of, and they seem to have they seem to follow the government view of civil society as troublemakers. And if you look at the books, and there are so many books, in the last 2 years, which tells you, read them, tells you about the work of civil society. You see how much they have done, really how much they have done. And a lot of the work has been done in spite of the struggles. So you have to look at them and not dismiss them as troublemakers like the government does, I want Singaporeans to be more open about what's happening around them, what's happening, the civil society. And the activists work very, very hard, And look at Alex saying he doesn't even have time to read. They work very hard, and you have to appreciate. And it is their effort that has made whatever improvements may have been made in the lives of domestic workers or foreign workers or women had been done by civil society activists, not the government. So you do need to be more open-minded, more welcoming of civil society activists and join the groups. And I would like to see them come together in a coalition. That's my wish.
Okay, Celine.
Wow, hope. I hope that we have a. I hope that we one day can achieve a free market of ideas, and that is to say that it's not about who's right and who's wrong or who's moral and who's not. It's just to have a kind of a horizontal platform, a landscape where everyone can express their views and everyone else can decide which of these views they agree or disagree with. And that's what I'm hoping to see. The other thing, I also hope that we all live so that we don't die. That's all.
Okay, thank you so much. There's actually a whole lot more about these people and other people who've been featured in the book. So please get the book. So there are other naysayers here: Kirsten Han, Dan Wong, Imran Taib, M. Ravi, Chua Beng Huat. There are so many more people here, and I may not have named them all, but if you see them, please go say hi to them. Also drop some questions for them in the Q&A box there. So any other questions you want to ask, please drop those there, and we'll reconvene in about 30 minutes, and we'll get answers for those questions. Yes.
You want me to, hello? Do you want to know who are the other naysayers who are here? So you can go and hunt them down in case they're like Alex Au is hiding in the corner, but he's not out here. Okay, Tan Hao is not here. Last minute he had some family things. Constant is here, of course. Tay Keng Soon. Yo Lam Kiong is here, right at the corner there. The former chief economist of GIC, former government man. Sharon George is in Hong Kong. Claire Liao is here. You want to stand up? That tiny little girl hiding behind everybody. Claire is here. Remy is not here. Solang is here. Solang, another tiny girl. Woman, sorry. The two tiny women are there. I think T. Sasi Taran is not here. Jennifer Teo is busy with Sungai Road or some other things that she's out. Dan Wong is here. Dan? Sitting down. Chua Beng Huat is here right in front. Kirsten is here behind Dan Wong. Filza, did Filza come? Filza is here, right? I can't see it. Right behind, standing up. Alex Au is right in front. Martin C, I don't think is he here? Where? Martin. Yeah, Martin's behind. June Chua is here, sitting right in the corner, the last person right in the very corner. William is not here. William Lim is not here. M. Ravi, right in front. Ravi, please put out your hand. The one with no hair, you can tell. Zihan? I think Zihan is not here. Not here, yeah. Vanessa also not here. Mohammad Imran, please. Yeah, right. Sitting at the back. Silan is right in front here. Sunny Liu is also behind, somewhere behind Dan Wong. Margaret Thomas is standing somewhere behind.
Over there.
Yeah, next to Yo Lam Kiong. And PJ Tam, I think PJ is not here. Maybe somewhere else. Talking to Shamugan, maybe.
He's still talking to Shamugan.
6 hours, not enough. Well, we of course invited everyone, but they're busy or they're not here. So please hunt them down if you want them to sign the book. Otherwise, just talk to them, find out something more. And we have books also written by, not just this book. We have Constance Singham's book. We have Tan Hao's plays. And we have some other books that were mentioned by the naysayers here as to what books are important or influence them. And if we have published it, it's here also for sale, just a few copies. So thanks again. We'll talk again soon.
We are going to come back, are we?
Yeah.
So in the book, in the acknowledgement, I mentioned about my father because ever since I was young, I would always hear him expressing political opinions. He's on TV watching the news all the time. So actually, while growing up, it didn't really feel like something of a big impact. It's something just in the background. It's just only once you grow up and then you realize, hey, I'm interested in the news because I hear about it all the time. So that's how it inspired me. The next question is quite a cheeky one. Will a sequel be possible? Perhaps the Naysayers Club, but still subversive in context. I can see how another sequel to the Naysayers book club could happen. But I guess I'll have to figure out whether the timing is right. It was partly why this book worked was because it came right after the election. There was a lot of hot button issues. So maybe with time, sure. And with Naysayers Club, I'm not sure who the Naysayers are. If it's the well, Keng Soon that's volunteered, that is the government. I think a lot of our MPs and stuff, it would be great to interview them and show perhaps their more human side. So not that they don't have this, it's just in the reports, whether the journalists covering them or whatnot, you don't really get a sense of that. So sure, there is space for that. Now some questions for the naysayers. This question is for Dan Wong, a satirist. He started a Good Citizen. So you can go online and see all his subversive treatments of the latest political happenings. So how or what can the younger generation do to help whatever is happening in Singapore, not just through social media? Yeah, you can just stand there and answer. Yeah, sure.
Wow. Can I just have a disclaimer that I feel that I'm possibly not the right person to ask, so I'm not answering as an expert, but I'm answering as a layperson in Singapore, right? And you're talking about younger people, right?
Yes, what can you do to help whatever is happening in Singapore?
In the context of civil society, right? I guess this.
Yes, but even in your work and all, how does that fit in contributing to Singapore?
I can only answer from what I know, and I think that in terms of younger people, I think younger people just because I teach part time at NAFA here and there, and I've got some contact with younger people, and I think that. There's two things. Is that first things first? I feel like we are losing this sense of empathy. So I think that younger people nowadays can just like try not to keep in their own social circles and echo chambers and try to understand more of different types of people with different opinions and different styles and rhythms of living, and be more empathetic towards them.
Thank you.
Don't be so quick to dismiss people.
Okay, we have one more question about younger generation, and this is for Kirsten Han, an activist and independent journalist. She's also started New Narrative, online news site. So the question is, do you worry or fear for the younger generations of Singapore, given their limited understanding or knowledge of our history? Meaning civil society and the history of activism in Singapore. Should history be made a compulsory subject?
I don't think that making history a compulsory subject would necessarily solve the problem, because you can have history in school and still not teach it well, which is... I mean, I learned history in secondary school, right? But I still had to take to Google to learn about Operation Coastal. So teaching history is not the same as knowing history. I do meet a lot of young people who are, because of the internet, starting to find ways to learn about history, Spectrum and Coastal, and about activists completely on their own outside of school. So I think, in my experience, to not underestimate the power of learning history. Because when I was speaking to friends in civil society who are around my age group, a lot of us actually completely independently came into civil society. The moment of change for us was reading about Spectrum, finding out about it for the first time, then reading about Coastal, and then realizing that there's this whole kind of part of Singapore that we were not taught, and that actually is really important to how we think about ourselves. And also because learning about that part of history was the first time it was suggested to us that what the government is telling you and what the Straits Times is telling you is not everything. And to then make you question, if they're not telling us this, what else are they not telling us? To then go out. And so a lot of us actually fell into civil society through things like this. So I think there's definitely a lot of power in the history. And personally, the more I read up about Singapore history, the more I feel there is this momentum. Because then you realize this whole kind of thing of like, oh, Singaporeans we prioritize law and order, we don't protest, that's just not in our DNA. It's completely false, right? We weren't born this way, we were made this way. And if we could be made this way, then we can be unmade this way. So for me, that's really the importance of knowing the history.
So it's not a matter of interest, there is hunger for these issues.
I think there is a hunger, but then unfortunately to have the hunger, you need to know that something is missing. And that's the difficulty that I worry about, that we might not be reaching people who do not yet realize that something is missing.
Thank you so much. We have one last question. It's for Chua Beng Huat, sociology professor in NUS. So this question is fittingly quite theoretical. This is from Alex Au. Is the present regime post-ideological? That's question one.
Present regime.
Question two is, are young Singaporeans uncomfortable with taking ideological positions? Specifically, young Singaporeans in uni. Yeah.
No government is ever post-ideological. I mean, I think that the Singapore government likes to keep insisting that it's post-ideological because it has a certain idea of what is an ideology, right? Because, I mean, it basically treats economy first. And it thinks that because economy is necessary, it's a sort of fundamental condition necessary for life in a capitalist state, that therefore making decisions that improve the economy is rational, practical, and therefore not ideological. But that is already a very clear choice of the values to valorize. That is the economy. I mean, if you actually take the current discussion of inequality. I mean, inequality is an interesting issue. I mean, capitalism produces inequality. Otherwise, there will be no capitalism. Exactly. So the discussion of inequality is really how bad is the inequality, right? But really, but technically speaking, you cannot solve the problem of inequality in a capitalist society. So it doesn't matter what Ong Ye Kung has been saying, and even Taman has been saying, right? The person we all think should be the next prime minister. But you can actually solve poverty problem. Poverty is not a necessity of capitalism. Inequality is a logical outcome, right? So you can actually solve, I mean, Singapore is a very rich country. There's no reason for anyone to be poor. That's an ideological problem. Poverty in Singapore is not a financial problem. It's an ideological problem. Why is it an ideological problem? And this is where the question of whether the PAP is post-ideological. It is not. It is very ideological, right? Because it has a certain assumption of what human nature is, which also makes it why, and actually I shouldn't say the PAP. I mean, Lee Kuan Yew in 1970s very clearly said that he made U-turn on welfareism, because when he went to Hong Kong, he saw how Hong Kong people, without any largesse from the colonial government, work very hard to feed themselves. So he likes the resilience of the Hong Kongers. And until that point, as King Soon said, they were all left-wing, they were all fairly good social democrats. They were actually quite generous with welfare. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the kind of public housing system we have today. I mean, one of the most important things about public housing is the government nationalized the land. That is actually our land reform. That is actually our land redistribution. And that only was done precisely because of the left-wing politics of the early independent years. But in 1970s, he changed his mind and he decided that the government should cut back on welfare because if you don't, people get lazy. That's a certain kind of assumption that is really false, but it continues to haunt the government, right? So we're now talking about inequalities. We should be talking about poverty. We should be talking about how nobody in Singapore deserves to be poor. So there are ideologies and you know, it has always been ideological. It just has been, we have kind of been, unfortunately, even some academics have contributed to suggest that being pragmatic in the PAP way is not ideological. But it is. It is all about valorizing the economy at the expense of other human values. And I think one of the things that critics in Singapore does is to actually often point out precisely where the humanitarianism, where the human values have been neglected. And I think this, you know, for example, Aware, Nature Society, all the sort of more organized groups, Heritage, had basically insist on putting other values on the table rather than just going along with getting a better material life, right? So, and I think that continues to be the case, unfortunately. I don't see any difference coming from the fourth generation that we are anticipating reluctantly, I think. Okay, so about young Singaporeans. It's actually, I think that it is very difficult because I'm still teaching in the NUS and I now teach at Yale NUS College also. And at Yale NUS College has 50% Singaporean students. The Singaporean students are very different from foreign students, and there in NUS College, Yale NUS, you can see very clearly because I teach the graduating class. And you see the difference they approach their final thesis topic. You find Singaporean students are very focused, very diligent, work on a project very well, you know, good managers of time, finish their thesis 2 weeks before deadline. You have American kids who are writing up to 4 o'clock in the morning, the night before they have to hand in. Does things a little bit more challenging, a little bit more sort of questioning of the premises. So I don't think, so you know, as a teacher, you see the difference, but I think the difference is not to be explained in terms of any lack on the part of the youth. I think it needs to be explained in terms of what the system produces. All right. I think that the education system really doesn't. The education system produces very knowledgeable young people, very diligent, very productive, but at the same time, it doesn't actually produces the kind of questioning mind that you would like to have, even in a place like Yale and US. And I'm talking about graduating class who are supposed to have gone to liberal arts college for the last 3.5 years. And that still doesn't come true, okay? So I think it's very hard. The government keep talking about innovation, entrepreneurship, and all this kind of stuff. I don't think that we might have to wait for another 10 years to see any kind of result, because as it currently is, for the next 10 years, I think most students will still be like the ones I described. But I think one of the interesting things about students in the university, and this is very interesting because they are very alienated. They're doing very well. They know they're doing very well. They're in the NUS, you know, they are like the top 10% of each cohort. They know that they've been stuck in the groove. They know they have been obedient in the groove from the day they start school. They know they have arrived, but they are very alienated. And it's for precisely having been for precisely the same reason that they're alienated. It's like, if they were not alienated, they won't be sitting in that classroom. They will be out there doing something else that they really would love to do. But they know that if they were doing those, right, then they are also going to be facing serious economic consequences down the road. So they are doing the right thing, and by doing the right thing, they are very angry and very alienated from themselves. And you can't get out other than maybe finishing the degree and say, okay, now I have basic ability to earn an income, and I will go to do whatever hell I want to do in the first place. And then if that fails, at least I can come back and do the straight things, right? So I think I have a lot, because I'm a university professor, I have a lot more sympathy for the young than Alex Au's question implied. And I think it's hard. The other interesting thing that is very hard for younger generation, I mean, I started an essay but never finished called Blame Your Parents. And I do that because I was asked to do a keynote at an international conference on housing policy. And I wanted to write about how housing has become unaffordable for young people, not just in Singapore, but globally. Because asset inflation has been really, really bad in this sort of neoliberal economy. And because it is no longer just an inequality of income, it's really inequality of asset ownership. It's really the inequality of wealth, not just inequality of wages. And I wanted to write this paper on Blame Your Parents because I think people that are in somewhere, the so-called baby boom generation has been excessively successful. Partly because of historical reasons, from post-war to about early 1990s, there's a very long period of economic expansion, capitalist economic expansion because of globalization. At the point that the baby boom generation comes into the economy, asset was still cheap because it was immediately post-war reconstruction. They had very steady job for 30 years, and they made a lot of money, and they invested a lot in the real estate and in other kinds of assets. And they live a very long life, so they have very long career. So by the time their children comes along, which is what we talk about, the young, basically they're screwed. So if you are now 27 years old and if you don't stand to inherit wealth, your ability to build wealth is going to be very difficult unless you are in the new digital economy. Because there you can still be, you might be better off trying to design a game that succeeds rather than, go to NUS. But, so I think it's very hard to be young right now. And it's particularly hard to be young in a fairly limited economy like Singapore. So I wouldn't be so harsh when I'm talking about young people. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Beng Huat. If you read the book, you'll find that Beng Huat makes it very clear that poverty is an ideological issue. And also on education, he reveals a funny anecdote about telling his nephew to tell his parents to not care about getting, tell his teacher that it doesn't matter how many A's you get. So you want to read more of those funny anecdotes, to get the book. There were a lot more questions. I'm so sorry I couldn't go through all of those. We'll try to answer these questions online. And thank you so much for coming today. Yes, it's been a pleasure. And I'd like to end the evening with what I started with, because I see this book as the start of a much bigger conversation about the kind of Singapore we want. So welcome to the Naysayers Book Club.